Hi there, and welcome on the journey to transform culture. I'm Steve, and I'll be your guide. Well, folks, I hope you're having a fantastic day and an even better week. As you can tell, I'm a little bit different setup today, just to change things up a little bit. Today, folks, wanted to jump in and talk a little bit about the win-win-win, right? Now, before you click off, this will be a little bit nuanced, a little different take on the win-win-win. Oftentimes, we jump in talking about organizations because that's where we come together as individuals to be a team most regularly, right? Most often. But it's not limited to that, right? We're part of civic organizations, different clubs and groups within the community, churches, we have friend groups, we have family, all of it, right? So a lot of times when we're talking about different things, you can see a little bit how these dots connect because really, folks, everything is connected, right? The personal, the professional, all of it, the cultural. So with that, let's jump into the win-win-win. I guess you could say it's the fractal of the win-win-win. And I think as we go, you'll understand why I bring that word into this, that description. But think of it win-win. It's easy to think of the two, win-win. Oftentimes you think about, okay, how can I get a win and how can you get a win? How can we, negotiate something to where we both get a win, right? And that can be challenging. I mean, look, folks, you don't have to go far. Okay, turn on the news, right? Different countries, right? The powers that be out in the world. It doesn't matter if we're talking about different states from these different countries. Whatever. There's always people trying to negotiate for a win for themselves, right? And each are trying to get a win, and hopefully going to the next step of getting a win for the other as well, right? To come to an agreement, right? That's essentially what an agreement is, where we can get a win-win. So that we understand pretty easily, right? But then you must think we have to bring in the other win, okay? And sadly, I don't have a triangle handy, or I would show you. But think of it like a triangle. Win, win, win. Well, now we need to get a win for, we'll say, me, okay? We're going to use you, me, and then another. Trying to get a win for me. We're going to negotiate to try to get a win for you, right? But then how can that relationship and that negotiation and that agreement now bring in wins for the third party, right? Now, it's pretty easy when we're thinking about organizations and so forth, that the third win is what? The end user, right? And that's true. So, but the challenge becomes more difficult now because we're trying to get a win for either of us, but then also a win for the third. And it doesn't really matter who we're saying is negotiating this. This could be the ownership, right? Trying to get a win, to try to get a win with the customer, negotiating price and all those things, but also to what? Get a win for my team, right? So that we have, we can build on our momentum and have the resources and pay them, of course, and all the good things, right? So it doesn't really matter who the initial two are. It doesn't. You start somewhere, right? But this triangle, this win-win-win applies. Now you can take this model, right, and then start to challenge yourself in different social situations, right? It might be that you have a bit of a disagreement, say at a store about a product. There's something on the shelf, and let's say you bought something and it didn't live up to, or they didn't meet the specified requirements that were listed. I don't know, I'm just making something up. All kinds of random stuff happens in our lives, so it's hard to just grab one. But it doesn't meet specifications of one way or the other. Well, now the store owner or manager is trying to now negotiate a resolution to get a win for you and for them. Now, more often than not, they'll just refund your money. But there are times when some stores don't do that. Oh, well, we offer in-store credit, da 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 da. Well, the person will say, I'm the customer. Yes, I understand that you do that, but in this case, this product doesn't meet the specified, requirements that, its specifications. So it is actually, this isn't just an exchange or a refund. This is due to an other situation, right? Essentially, the product doesn't meet the requirements, right? So I'm trying to get you to see my perspective, and you're probably, that manager's probably trying to say, well, I understand, but our policy, did you see how, and who hasn't either been a party to this or seen this from afar, close or far out of earshot, or just the other end of earshot has seen this go on. We all have, right? and there's a little roundabout, and I've seen where these kinds of things, where the customer storms off mad, right? Because they think that that was unjust and they didn't get a win, right? It wasn't even that they didn't get a win; that neither got a win, right? Because now that customer is going to go say, "Oh, this store, don't go there," blah blah blah, and then that's going to have a ripple effect, right? The red domino, right? The negative ripple effect, and that's going to it's going to infect and affect that store, right? So you can see we're just two individuals, when they are struggling, right, to find agreement, how those can get in some difficult little spaces, right? Now, if we're talking about specifications and warranties and all of these things, right? My gosh, the automobile industry is struggling big time currently with quality issues and all kinds of mess. I mean, it doesn't really matter what brand you're throwing in the conversation, right? And all of the customers that are unsatisfied, unhappy because of products breaking down and all the different myriad of things going wrong. So there's a lot of that, and what do you think? Just like that store owner, well, we don't do this and we don't do that, right? And how do you think that's affecting these industries? It's hurting them, and you're probably going to see a dip in price, and this is oftentimes what happens. These things affect price, right? And it doesn't mean that should be a vehicle to arrive at that, but it can be the result because now there's a question mark about quality. I know with my recent experience, I know a certain brand that I will not buy ever again because the quality is like a question mark on fire. And that's me, but I would repeat, I'm not going to say that here because why? Am I saying everything they make is horrible? No, but I am saying that I don't want to spin the wheel on that and take a chance, right? Because it's just there's just too much of a trend, too many data points pointing south. So there's one example, right? But you can see where it can be difficult, right? To find agreements, and come to an agreement and get two wins. But now add the third win in there. Now, you could look at this as the ownership, the broader team, ownership and, site leaders, for example, the broader team, right, doing the bulk of the work, and customers, right? If you thought two was difficult, just add that third one in there. And this is where we see a breakdown. We've seen a breakdown, right? The KPIs don't lie, folks. There's so many struggling industries and sectors out there that are just struggling terribly. Their performance is just atrocious for productivity, overall effectiveness and efficiency, right? Which what becomes cost passed on to the customer, right? So already that portion of the triangle is taking a hit. And if you think about it that way, you can use this triangle. You could say, well, it could be enforcement agencies, right? Regulatory agencies enforcing things because, consumer affairs and others, right? Because customers are being let down by certain industries, and so consumer affairs are trying to get in there to maybe negotiate wins, right? And see recalls and just all the things, right? So on the face of it, it sounds fairly easy. Win, win, win. But it's not always easy. And I don't want to sugarcoat anything here for you folks, but I will say this. The easiest way, the easiest way if you're going to approach this and approach the challenge of this is to go, okay, how do I get a win for my end customer? Okay, now, how do I get a win for, my team? In this example, we'll say I'm the owner. How do I get a win for my team? Okay, now how am I going to get a win out of this? Or am I going to be left without a win? Right? And so you can map this out. You can literally just sketch this out on paper if you want. And you can map this out and go, how do I get wins for these three groups, right? And especially since you're, the owner is typically the decision maker in this situation. So you map this out and you say, well, man, I can get them a win. I can get the customer a win. I can get my team a win. But I'm not getting a win. This is the beginning of now assessing your value stream, right? All your processes, everything end to end. Assessing all of that and going, where can I draw out more efficiency, right? How can I become more efficient, improve my quality? Essentially, how can I be more effective, right? If we combine those. How can I become more effective with the entire, say, organization so that I can get wins also, for the customer, for the team, and now for myself, for the broader company, say. Here's the tough part. If you change the order around, right, of that triangle, anyway, well, I'm going to get my win. I'm going to get my team a win. Oh, I'm going to leave the customer hanging out. Right? And now this is what we've seen for the last few years. And how is this represented? How have we seen this? Prices that blew up over 25, 29%. In different, in large part across many industries. Right? They literally just passed the buck on to the customers saying, oh, well, it's supply chain and it's this and it's that. And, well, it was a tough year after X, Y, and Z happened and blah, blah, blah. Excuses, right? They never really went in and did the due diligence. Add to that, many of them didn't even get their teams wins, right? Because you had people who didn't want to work for these companies. Why? Because the culture was so awful, they had not been getting wins before. So now the companies were getting theirs. The employees were still getting kind of, left out in the cold as far as getting a win. and the customers were definitely taking an L, not getting a win, right? So that's the awful way to go. Now, this also works differently. If you are the owner, and you get your team a win and yourself a win and the customer loses, right? Or, okay, we already talked about I get the customer a win and my team a win, then I lose, right? You can see where you start rotating this around, all of it then should be driving you to, motivating you to, persuading you to, the universe nudging you, right? Giving you a little, hey, go that way. It should be nudging you toward improving your organization, right? Now this, and look, folks, I got over 200 videos. Just Rolodex through those and find a topic that in critical areas where maybe you're struggling, and cruise through those. But essentially, you need to work on your organization. And it doesn't mean you have to eat the whole pizza, right? Just like anything, one slice at a time. You know, pick the slice that is causing you the most pain and work on that. You know, if you can work on a slice or two, great, but at least start with the biggest problem you have and then work your way through the list, right? But it's helpful to know what the list is. It's helpful to know what the list is, and it's also helpful to understand that if you don't understand people, you know, you may think, well, I know my product inside out. We make the XYZ widget, blah, blah, blah. Yes, but if you don't know people and you have people on your team, right? If you really don't go below the waterline, you know, if your ability to understand people is super, like a thimble deep, then that's the area you're struggling in. And it's okay, right? Just own it and go, hey, this is a reality. I need to figure people out a little bit better. I need to work on some of this. I need to read a couple books and, you know, do some things, get up to speed. You can do it. It's not rocket science. And a lot of these things will be revelatory because I'll be honest with you folks, even some of the stuff organizationally spills right into other groups within culture, right? Doesn't matter if it's your civic organizations, clubs, your churches, your friend groups, your family, it doesn't matter. Trying to get wins. Now, oftentimes we understand a lot of these, you know, this win-win-win thing is these relationships as being, well, reciprocity. You know, I want to get a win and you get a win, right? But a lot of times you don't think of the third aspect. You know, if you think of a family, the husband and the wife to get a win for the kids, right? So, and you see how that goes around. But if it's the husband gets a win, the kids get a win, but the wife doesn't get a win, right? That doesn't work. The wife gets a win, the kids get a win, but the husband doesn't get a win, right? So you can't leave any parts of the triangle left unattended, right? They all have to be tended to. And quite honestly, folks, you can take a look at this organizationally. You can look at it in these, civic organizations and churches and all the things you're involved with, all the way to your families, right? And you can see where this breakdown occurs. It occurs in organizations. What do you think you have high turnover? Why do you think the divorce rate? What do you think? It comes back to this, folks. It's a simple key. And using this win-win-win as kind of a key to understand this will help you to resolve these things. Because then you can say, oh, well, I'm leaving, my team out in the cold in this situation. I need to work on how to do this. And then either don't move forward or identify and then be working on these things to get a win for the third party in this situation, right? So just a little, want to talk a little bit about, and let me tell you about this too. And just because, you pick three, right? Pick any three you deal with, and then understand that any one of those are connected to others. And then they have a triangle coming off. So each point also has a triangle. So you start to see where it becomes a fractal, right? It's, all of this is a fractal that just replicates. And if you understand this is what all of culture is made up of, right? It's just a massive amounts of these triangles attached to one another that expand out there, right? You could look at this as the environment, humans, the environment, the animal kingdom, right? You could look at this as, anything. So don't feel like this is only relegated to just people and these different environments. No, it could be anything, whatever. It could be a subject or an object, potentially, right? So anything that can be helped or hurt, really, right? So anyway, just wanted to touch base with that a little bit on the win-win-win fractal, right? Hopefully you can find value in that. And on that note, remember, folks, hit that good green domino to uplift, motivate, inspire, and just encourage one another. Remember, do that about 3 to 5 times a day or more. And what you'll start to see is you start to see culture start transforming little by little. But not only that, you'll be transforming as well. But remember, you can't transform anything on the outside unless you're willing to transform on the inside. It's super important, right? And you can use a triangle for these things as well. All right, folks. Hope you're having a great day. Remember to hit like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.